complete guide to dynamic JavaScript form validation. All the code that I used will be available through the GitHub link down below. Start by removing any HTML form validation that we have. So any required attributes like that right there, we need to go ahead and get rid of that. And for our phone number input, we're going to go ahead and change the type from tell to text. And then we're also going to remove our min and max length attributes. We're not going to be including an action, so we'll go ahead and get rid of that. And now that we have our basic structure set up and ready to go, what we need to do is start adding a span element for each one of the fields that we want to require. So in this case, we're going to require the first 3 fields here, and each one of these spans is going to have text telling our client what is wrong and what they need to fix. So in this case, our name is going to be required, and inside of our span, we're going to create an ID equal to name alert. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this span, and I'm going to go down here and also include it for my email, change the ID to email alert, and then I'm going to change this to say enter a valid email, because we're going to check for a valid email using JavaScript. And then we're going to do the same thing again, but for our phone input fields. And now you guys can see that our alerts are successfully showing up on our page here, but we need to add some basic styling. So I'm going to go over to my CSS, select my span elements, and then I'm going to paste some basic styling that I already have. If you guys want to look more into this, use the GitHub link down below. And now you guys can see that our errors are successfully displaying. However, we don't want them to display until the user has a chance to fill out these fields. So what we need to do for now is change our display to none. And now you guys can see that our errors are not displaying, but if for any reason you need to enable these for your own reference, you can go to your inspection tools here and just disable this display property like so to enable those elements again. But we're going to go ahead and refresh that because we don't need that for now. And I have already linked my index.html to our JavaScript page over here. First, we need to go ahead and create a constant variable. If you guys want more information on variables, I'll leave a link to those videos down below for you guys. And we're going to call this variable form. And what we're going to do is we're going to select our form element using a query selector. So we're going to go document.query selector, and then we want to go ahead and select our form element, which is going to be our entire form with all the input values. Next, what we need to do is select each one of our span elements that we created that we want to dynamically render onto the page based on the user input. So we're going to call this name alert, and we're going to once again use our document.getElementById, and we're going to select our name alert ID. And then we're going to go ahead and copy this and do it for the next 2 elements as well. So now you guys can see that I successfully created variables for our name alert, email alert, and phone alert messages. So we're going to start off by creating a function called validate email, and this function is going to take a argument of email, and then we want to go ahead and create our email regular expression that we're going to use to test the input from our form. So we're going to call this email regex, and we're going to make it equal to our regular expression. This regular expression here looks really complicated, but basically all this is doing is testing for a valid email input. I will be making a video going more in depth on regular expressions, so make sure you guys stay tuned for that. And then we want to create a variable called isValid, and this is going to be where we use our email regex variable.test, which is a built-in JavaScript function to test whether or not our email is a valid input. So what we're doing here is we're testing with our regular expression here against our email input from our client side form. And what this is going to do is it's going to return a Boolean value of true or false. And then what we want to do is, based on the input from our user, we want to change the display of our email alert by using our email alert variable .style.display to change the display of our element based on whatever they input. So what we want to do is enter our email variable here, and what this is going to do is it's going to evaluate whether or not email is true, meaning is there something entered in this input field here, and if there's nothing entered, it's going to evaluate to false. Create another conditional seeing if our email regular expression is true or not. So we're going to type is valid, and then we're going to use our question mark again, and if this is valid, we want to change the display of our property or leave it as none here. But if this evaluates to false, meaning our regular expression is not true, what we need to do is show our error message as block. So we're going to change our display to block here. And then what we also need to do is come back here, and if our email here evaluates to false, this line of code is not going to run here. So what we want to do, if nothing is entered, is also display our email alert as block here. And then finally, we want to return is valid. And what this is going to do again is it's either going to return true or false. And what we need to do is actually change our variable name here to the correct name, and now you guys can see our errors go away. So again, this is going to return true or false, and we're going to use that later on in the validation. Now what we're going to do is create a function to check our phone. So we're going to do validate phone like this, and it's going to take an argument of phone, and then we want to create another regular expression for our phone like so. So we're going to call this phone rejects, and we're going to paste our regular expression here, and this is going to check for a phone number in the format that we have right here. And then we're going to again create a variable called is valid, and we are going to use our phone regular expression and test our phone input here. And then we want to conditionally change our phone alert display based on the user input being true or false, meaning they enter it correctly, just like we did for our email. So now we're going to check if our phone input has a value or not. And if it does have a value, what we need to do is use our is valid variable here and check if that's true or not. If that is true, we're going to display as none. But if it is false, we want to display as a block. And again, outside of that block of code here, if there is nothing entered for our phone input, we again need to change our display to block. And lastly, we're going to return our is valid variable again, and this is going to return true or false. And so now that we have our validation functions specifically for our email and our phone inputs set up, what we need to do is create a function to validate the entire form called validate form, and this function is not going to take any arguments. And what we need to do is get the input values of each one of our input fields using our document.id. So we're going to go ahead and use document.getElementById and select our name, and we also want to get the value, so we're going to use .value. So what this is going to do is it's going to store the value of whatever our user enters here. So if I enter Kalman like so, that's what this variable is going to hold. And we also need to do this for our next two inputs, so we're simply going to change these to their respective IDs, and those IDs are coming from the ID associated with our input field here. So you can see ID email and ID name and then ID tel, which we're actually going to go ahead and change to phone. We're going to create our last variable and change this to phone. So now what we're doing is we're selecting the values of these 3 input fields here. Now what we want to do is conditionally change the display of our name alert based on the input of our name field right here. So we'll go name alert.style .display, and again we're going to use our ternary operator, which is basically a shorthand for an if and else statement, and we're going to use our name variable here to check if this is true or not using our ternary operator. So if this evaluates to true, meaning there's a input in this input field here, we do not want to display our name alert, so we'll go ahead and include none. But if there is nothing entered, we want to display our name alert as block. And then what we're going to do is create 2 variables, one for our email and one for our phone number. And we're going to call this one for our email is valid email value to test if this has a valid input or not. And to do this, we're going to use our validate email function, and we're going to pass in our email variable here. So what this is going to do is it's going to run our validate email function here and go ahead and insert whatever value is coming from our HTML form right here. And then we also need to create one more, and we're going to call this is valid phone value and make this equal to our validate phone function, and we're going to pass our phone variable in here again so we can test whether or not our phone number is entered correctly. And then at the end of this function, we want to return our name and our is valid email value variable and our is valid phone number value here. And what this is going to do is it's going to return either true or false. And that's going to take us into the next part of today's video, is where we actually add our event listener directly to our form element using our form variable that we created in today's video. So with our form, we're going to add an event listener, and what this is going to be is it's going to listen for a submit event. And we also want to pass our event, which is going to pass our event object here. And upon clicking our submit button here, what we want to do is prevent the default action from happening. So we're going to say event.prevent default, which is just going to prevent the default form action from taking place. And then we want to use a basic if statement, and this is going to check if our validate form function is true or not. And what this is also going to do is it's going to call our validate form function. And so if our validate form function is true, meaning that down here, if all of these variables return true, we want to reset our form because we don't want to leave any client information in the form. And all this is going to do is just clear out all our form inputs. So now we actually want to go ahead and test out this form. So you can type in whatever you want here, like so, and then go ahead and click submit. And you're going to notice that we accidentally left some of our HTML form validation like this. So what we need to do is go back to our HTML page and see exactly what's going on here. So you guys can see that our type is set to email here, which we need to change to text because our HTML is trying to validate it, but we don't want that. So this is not working because obviously I spelled document wrong. So I'm going to go ahead and correct that for each one of these, because it's not being able to find our document here. So now if we go back and go ahead and test this, you're going to notice when we click submit, our error messages successfully show. And if we go ahead and type in a name here now, what you're going to notice is that when I click submit, our error message goes away. And if I just enter something here, but it's not valid, our error message will stay. But if I come back here and enter a valid email address like kalmanwebdesign@gmail.com, click submit, our error message will go away. And same thing with our phone number here. So now all of that goes away, and when our form evaluates to true, it's going to reset it as it just did there. And so now we're going to get even more advanced because we want this to actually work dynamically, meaning when we click submit and we go back here and enter a valid email address, we want this error to go away, and we're going to create another event listener. And this one's going to again target our form element, and we're going to add an event listener, but this time instead of using a submit event listener, we're going to use a input event listener. So this is going to listen to any change in an input field. And again, we need to pass our event object so we can use that in our function here, a console.log message, and include your event, and it will log out the event object so you guys can understand what that's doing a little bit better. So first we're going to create a constant and we're going to call this target, and all this is going to do is store our event dot target, meaning this is going to store whichever input field is being targeted, and whichever input that's being targeted is going to be triggering our input event listener. First, what we need to do is create an if statement looking for a target dot ID, and we're going to be looking for our name here. So if our target ID is name, meaning our first input field here, what we want to do is conditionally render our name alert. So what we're going to do is go name alert dot style dot display, if I can spell correctly today, and we're going to make this equal to our conditional, checking if the target dot value of our input field here is true or not. So if there is something entered in this input here, we want to make sure that our name alert is not displaying. So we're going to change the display to none. But if it is false, meaning there's nothing there, we'll change it to block. So now we'll go back over here and test this out. So if we click submit, our error is going to display. However, if we start entering information here, you're going to see that our error message goes away. We want to do the same exact thing for each one of our required input fields. So we're going to go ahead and copy this statement here and enter it in our else if down here. Make sure you include else if like so. And we're going to be looking for our email ID. And inside of this, we can just run our validate email function and pass our value. So we'll use target dot value of our email input to our validate email function here. And since we already have it conditionally rendering here, we don't need to include it again. So all we need to do is just include it like so, and it will display our error message depending on this conditional statement. Add another else if statement for our phone input. So we're going to use our target dot ID, and we're going to be looking for specifically our phone input here. And if we can find that, we want to run our validate phone function, and we want to pass in our target dot value, which again is going to be our phone number input here. And now if we go ahead and test this out, you guys are going to see that if we go to our email and start entering something random in here and it doesn't evaluate to a legitimate email address, you're going to see a enter a valid email, and this is going to render every time you change anything in this input field. But let's say we change this to a valid email like kalmanwebdesign@gmail.com. You'll see that message completely disappear. And same thing with our phone number. If we enter an invalid phone number, our error message will display. But if we enter a valid phone number here, you're going to see that that goes away. And again, if we hit submit and we forget to enter something for our name, what will happen is it will display name is required, and once we enter a name here, you'll see that message go away. And now that we have all of our form input fields correctly entered, when we hit submit, our form will reset. If you guys have any questions or need help sending this server side using PHP to a database, I do have videos covering all that information. There will be links to those down below. If you have any questions or need any help, reach out through the comments down below or go to our website at kalmanwebdesign.com.